Cool. Good evening, everyone. It's good to be with all of you. This is one of those strange sorts of things to kind of be in multiple places at one time. We're going to do the best that we can. The purpose of tonight's shir is to kind of deal more with issues of food. Last week we spoke about cleaning for Pesach. Good to review things. Thank God most people are familiar with them, but it's good to review things from time to time. But we're going to deal this evening with food matters, specifically Kitniyot, and then talk a little bit about milk and meat and eggs and medicine. Okay? Hopefully this is review for most people. There is a thing that you review these things, right? That's what you do, right? So again, hopefully we're going to be covering material that will be somewhat familiar with to most people. But with that being said, if you have questions, and even if you feel like, maybe it's a silly question, no silly questions, really important that you ask, and I'd love to address them. You can also, those of you on Zoom, if you want to just write me a private question, then you're certainly welcome to do that, to write straight to me, and we could do it that way. Those of you who are here don't have that option. I guess we could go on Zoom and then do it, but that would be kind of weird. Anyway, cool. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen with those of you at home. And I'm not going to just read. Everyone can do that, thank God. Those of you at home who don't have access to this, I will make this, Rabavi and I, we're going to send out a bunch of resources as we do every year, and this will be included within that. You can also find this online. All these sources are all online. This is Rav Melamed. So I missed that session a couple weeks ago, whatever it was, that Rabavi led, exploring Rav Melamed, who's, we've been talking about you. And this is, it's a great resource. As you see, it's very clear and very, precise. And so I'm not going to just read through this, but we're going to kind of use it as a base upon which to learn. And obviously, if anybody has any questions, then please feel free to just jump in. What I want to talk about first is, and this again for many of you will be kind of review, and that is the issue of Kitniyot. So I'll just start, why are Kitniyot prohibited?
Because it used to be mixed with wheat.
Right. Yeah, they used to be mixed with grains, right? What else? What do you think?
It's almost become like irrespective of what was once done, this is now what we do. So it's just like on the list of things that are not allowed to Pesach at this point.
Okay, interesting. So Rabavi, for those of you at home who can't hear, Rabavi said, that's kind of just how it's done, and so this is what we continue to. So is that implying that it's not a real concern, nonetheless, or to this day?
It's like gebrox is another one, which is where you dip the matzah in water, and like some people are really careful about that, and no one's saying that it's actually becoming chametz, but it's this like hyper awareness of chametz that we're seeking to avoid chametz, both literally and metaphorically, so we stay away from it.
Right, but I would have to differentiate between those things, because gebrox is definitely a minhag, right? Definitely a very strong minhag amongst Hasidim. Even though, some of them might think in their mind that it is chametz, but obviously it doesn't make any sense, because once the matzah touches the mouth, gebroch, for those of you at home who are not familiar, it's also called shruya, which is this idea of taking a matzah, of not letting any matzah touch water or any sort of liquid, or putting anything on matzah unless it's the 8th day, right? On the 8th day, you go crazy, like dip in everything. That is definitely a minhag, right? There is some basis for Kitniyot. Still a minhag, obviously. Yeah. It is still a minhag. Sephardim don't keep Kitniyot, but there is still some space for it, right? Rav Melamed mentions here, I'll just, for those of you, do you guys all have unit? So Rav Melamed mentions 3 things. Let's just first off just point out when we talk about chametz, we're talking about wheat, barley, spelt, oat, and rye. Okay, those are the only things that can become chametz. Other things might fall under the category of kitniyot or not. Malabim mentions three. If you look in that second paragraph, he mentions three reasons why kitniyot might be prohibited. Again, should be some element of review. Number one, kitniyot are cooked in the same way as grains. And so, if people cook rice here, then they might say, oh, you can cook rice, so you can cook other things as well, right? Maybe. Okay. Number two, since kitniyot, like cereal grains, are often made into flour, people might see, them making all these potato flour things. That we'll talk about this a little bit later on, like going to Israel, for example. You go to Israel and you go to Burger Bar, and it's like this full-on fat, this full-on fat burger, and it's like, okay, it's potato flour, but it looks like, and it almost tastes like it. It's still potato flour, but so that's quite remarkable. How can you do that? And so you might have the unlearned masses at the end of the day who will become mistaken. And then finally, and this I think is the primary one and the biggest concern, even to this day, which is grains and kitniyot kernels are similar in appearance and kept in the same storehouses for relatively long periods. That is still true to this day. Okay, that you can, when buying any one type of grain, you buy rice and you're going through rice, it's very common to find other types of grain in it. I've seen it many times, right? Does it happen that often? No, but it can happen. And so out of some concern for that, they prohibited. Now, back in the day, then that was obviously much more of a likelihood. They used to grow things together, do crop rotation, and they would, grow one year one thing, and then grow the next year 1 year wheat, and the next year pulse or whatever it is, and then you could have something mixed up within that. That was a lot more common. Today, with kind of the industrialization of farming, it's less common, but it is possible. I have seen in the past, going through rice and you find wheat, right? That happens. Okay, so for these reasons, whether they are that strong or not, I don't know, but we have this custom. Kitniyot is a very strong custom. Is kitniyot chametz? Definitely not, right? Definitely not. I remember, Sir Avi sitting with me here, and our dear Rabbi, Reb Shuki Reich, right? He was dealing with the question of if you have someone who, what was the situation? I'm trying to remember the exact situation where you've got like a young couple, and there's a young couple, and they don't eat kitniyot. Right, they don't eat kitniyot, and they want to start eating kitniyot because it's like a Sephardi who's married, an Ashkenazi who's married a Sephardi. Right, so the question is, can they now start eating kitniyot? We're not going to deal with this, inside the sources, but so his question that he asked to them was, why is it that you don't eat kitniyot? If they say because kitniyot is chametz, so he says you don't have to, then you can definitely start eating kitniyot, because there's a complete misunderstanding of the custom. It's only a custom. So if a person thinks that it's an isur, it's a prohibition, then there's a complete misunderstanding, and then you don't even have to take release your vow in order to be able to eat kitniyot. So that's an important thing to just establish from the outset, that kitniyot is definitely not chametz. Yeah, I know for most people here that would be pretty elementary. The real question around kitniyot is, well, what's included, and do we expand what is included every year to include anything that might fit under that category? And that, I think, has been, and we see basically two different camps dealing with that question. There is one camp that says if there's anything, unless it's potatoes, but if there's anything that could in some way get put under the category and be similar to it. The big one that came up a couple years ago was quinoa, right? If it looks like a duck, and if it looks similar to it, then you can, then you include it, you just put it in and you make it usur. And there's another said, no, like, this is what it is. this is Kitniyot, any newfangled whatever. I mean, now there's, I don't know, you go to the health food store, there's a million different types of things that they can sell, all these different grains that aren't grains. No, we don't expand the list of what Kitniyot are. Okay, and that you see two different approaches to it, and people fall in within that particular, those camps.
Yeah, I was going through the Kosher Australia guide, and in that they were basically saying there are these ones that are clearly on one side of the equation or on the other, but then there was a whole lot of stuff that was customary, and it was like depending on your custom, either this or that.
Garlic and
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was like interesting because like they didn't actually give people guidance necessarily on some of that stuff, and it was always like check with your local rabbi, and it was like, what does that actually mean? Like, what are people meant to do practically? Eat garlic or not eat garlic?
surely the source is when we were in Poland, when we were in Russia, this is what we did, and therefore this is okay, and everything else is not.
Right. Or this is not okay and everything else is.
Yeah.
Meaning this is what Kitniyot is, and then you could do you can eat the rest.
Yeah.
But I think, at the end of the day, Bobby, that, like, if there are things that are under question, then they can't give that. That's not their role. Their role is to say it. Some people look at this, some people don't. Okay. Rav Malamed mentions here, at least the editor mentions at the bottom of page 1, that they haven't really translated Kitniyot. People often talk about, like legumes, but that's not, because that's only fits a small category of it. I mean, rice is not a legume. And so it's one of those things like tsarat, right? It's like, how do you translate tsarat? So what are Kitniyot? Let's just go through this again very, very briefly. Rice, second page here, rice, alfalfa, peas, millet, sorghum, chickpeas, fenugreek seeds, sunflower seeds, mustard, which is a big one, buckwheat, right? He says here, kusemet in Hebrew, not to be confused with kusmin, which is spelt, which is one of the 5 grains. Cumin, vetch, which is the least appetizing name for a food. I don't even know what vetch is. It sounds like what you do after you eat food. Black-eyed peas, arum, soy, mung beans, lentils, fava beans, lupin beans, poppy seeds, flax seed, pulse, caraway, hemp seeds, common beans, sesame seeds, lupine seeds, corn, clover seed, and tamarind fruit. Interesting. Okay, so that's Rav Malamed. That's obviously quite an extensive thing. I think, if I remember correctly, Kosher Australia came out against quinoa. They were like of the early adopters against it, and then they reversed their opinion. The OU did the same thing. Quinoa is a berry. Quinoa is technically a berry, but again, that doesn't stop them from, throwing on these other things that are in it.
Are they categorizing? So the ones that we just listed, do they all fall under all of those 3 reasons?
I think, there's 3 reasons that, generally speaking, and not all of them are relevant. And when the rabbis were developing the halacha and saying these, again, from the Ashkenazi practice, these are the names of the sorts of things that they were, prohibiting.
Cool.
Okay.
I didn't know.
Yeah. Does that change things to you?
Yeah.
Okay, I just want to check in here at home. How's everybody going at home? Give me, I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you, Daniel, for being with me. Who's Zoom user? It's very precise. I'm a Zoom user.
All good.
Ian, thank you.
I think that's me, Dean.
Dean, it is you. Hi, Zoom user.
Hello. How are you?
Okay, cool. You're like very confident and very, very proud. I'm a Zoom user. All right, let's get back in here. Sweet. So there we go, right? We've got, the different types. That's not super interesting. Where it gets more interesting is that, every way in which it's consumed, right? How do you deal with oils? How do you deal with when it's mixed into other foods and the like? So let's just, again, use Rav Malamed as a base. Before we do that, we'll go to number 5 there. That's on page 2. Is that correct? Yeah, page 2. So he says the following thing, and this is an important point. He says, people who adhere to the custom of not eating kitniyot may keep them in the house. You don't have to get rid of them. You don't have to sell them. You don't have to put them away even. And not only that, you can derive benefit from them, for example, by lighting a lamp with Kitniyot oil, which is less relevant for us, but an area that is very relevant to many of us, myself included, is pet food. A lot of pet food, which is why, how is it that you get kosher Pesach? Dog food, right? It's more problematic than cat food, I think, and that's because it's made with kitniyot. It's not made with wheat. So you just check, the amount of kosher Pesach dog food and cat food is astounding here, right? And it's because it's made with, and there's all these gluten-free dogs running around here anyway. So yes, that's an area where it's mutar, is permitted to get hana'ah, to get benefit from kitniyot. It's not chametz, it is permitted. It says likewise, one who does not eat kitniyot Pesach may cook them for somebody who does, right? And that's another thing. Now, when we get into this question of what about going to someone's home if they are eating kitniyot, you go to your Sephardi friend's home and they normally eat kitniyot. So generally speaking, right, if you're Ashkenazi, that doesn't mean that you can now eat rice at a Sephardi person's home. And that's part of the cultural sensitivity. The Sephardim need to be sensitive to us Ashkenazim this time around, this time of the year. And we can't eat rice, right? Even those people who, we can't eat rice. Can you eat from a utensil that cooked kitniyot in it? So the answer is yes. Ideally, it would have been that pot would have not been used to cook kitniyot within the past 24 hours. But even so, it's not an isur, right? It's not the same thing as like when you're cooking meat in a pot and then using that pot to then cook dairy. So it has to be 24 hours. We explained also last week an important point in terms of koshering the home that, before you kosher anything, the thing needs to have waited for 24 hours, right? Because during that, once 24 hours passes, whatever taste that is embedded within the thing becomes notain tam lifgam. It becomes like a bitter, not very nice taste, and so therefore it's not a problem. So that's in general when we deal with kashrut, but with kitniyot it's a little bit different. While Rav Melamed recommends that, of course, you do, like ideally it would have waited for 24 hours, but if not, it's not an isur.
Can I ask a question in 24 hours?
Yeah.
Probably covered this last week. If you don't know, so say you're moving into a house on Erev Pesach, not the night, the day before,
Right.
So you don't know what's gone on in that house beforehand, so you don't know if the sink's been used or whatever. You have to kosher it.
Yeah.
Are you better off waiting until it's? You could wait 24 hours, but then you'd be actually Erev Pesach after.
You want to do it before the time of bitul.
Right.
I think because it's a suffix,
Yeah.
I think you're okay. I think it's better if you know for sure that it's better to know, and if you have the opportunity, get there on the Wednesday, and you can wait. But let's say you get there on the Thursday. I think you're still, if it's an Airbnb sort of situation, So I think because it's a suffix, then you'll be okay, and you definitely want to kosher it before the time of bitul comes in the day before, right? Just on Erev Pesach. Yeah.
You can just add soap to whatever. I don't know what specifically.
But that's yes. I mean, in terms of like making it lifgam, right? Pagum. Yeah. That's but for the whole kitchen.
I can sink it.
For like the whole sink.
So I guess you could add some.
Right. I mean, ideally, you would let it sit for 24 hours if you can, and if not, that's a good approach. Okay. Naomi, do you have a question there? Or are you just being friendly? I appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, cool. So he mentions there at the top of page 3 that once again that you should wait 24 hours and then use those utensils that kitniyot was cooked in. So if you go to a Sephardi person's home, you can use those utensils ideally if 24 hours has passed. Footnote 3 is really important. Footnote 3 is talking about in what circumstances is kitniyot batel, is kitniyot nullified. So he mentions here that kitniyot in a mixture are batel in a simple majority, what's called batel barov, just for those of you, most of you familiar, but if not, when you have a mixture of two different items, then let's say one of those items is prohibited, you need a certain amount of the other item in a ratio against that prohibited item in order to nullify it. It almost makes it as if it doesn't exist. The famous case is, of course, milk and meat, batel b'shishim, that if you have a forbidden mixture of meat and milk, then if you have 60 parts milk to the 1 part meat, then it is nullified. Kitniyot, however, is batel barov. Okay, he mentions here the Trumat Hadeshin says it's batel b'shishim. So when we say batel barov, meaning all you need is a majority against it. Now, that doesn't mean. I'm going to read it so we're as precise as possible. The third line, last word of the line is al. All of not al. All of this applies when one found that kitniyot had been mixed with permissible food, but it is forbidden to mix kitniyot with permissible food intentionally, contrary to the opinion of the Pri Chadash that one may intentionally add kitniyot to a mixture as long as they do not become the majority of the mixture. Okay. So that ruins everything, right?
Yeah,
not exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't purposely add it. But this point is still significant, right? So he just mentions, let's just finish this line. If one who does not eat kitniyot visits one who does eat kitniyot and there's nothing else for the guest to eat, he may, if absolutely necessary, eat the non-kitniyot food from mixture containing kitniyot. For example, he may eat potatoes and zucchini from a dish containing kitniyot, even though the food he is eating absorbs some of the flavor of the kitniyot. Okay, so that's an example of where you come into a situation where all you can do is eat that. Okay.
But specifically that you eat the kitniyot, the non.
Right. So you're not eating the chickpeas, right? But you can eat the potatoes and not the chickpeas, even though the potatoes have been slightly flavored by the chickpeas.
What if the chickpeas were the majority? Then you couldn't even pick out anything?
No, I think you can. Because they're like, he's saying it's even if it's
Or if you're creating a new dish, when you take out the potatoes.
Right, so it's not about raw anymore.
Well, it is about raw of what you're eating.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is all pretty standard, and it hasn't really helped those people who are going to Israel just yet. What about oil? Okay, that's really where it comes into play, because a lot of the foods that are called kitniyot products are using some form of oil, of a kitniyot oil, or kitniyot derivative, and not the actual food itself.
Yeah, like mayonnaise.
Like mayonnaise, exactly. And so you go to Israel and you're like, oh, super excited. And you go to the supermarket and it says, oh, la'ochlei kitniyot bilvad, only to those people who eat kitniyot. And you're like, man, why'd I come here? Have no fear. So there are different opinions on this, but let's follow Rav Melamed. It's not just Rav Melamed; it is also many other rabbis who take a more lenient approach on this.
Okay. Just before that, it did help because it says you can go to a restaurant which serves kitniyot and order something that doesn't have kitniyot.
Correct. You can definitely go to a restaurant, even if they do sell it. But you got to ask them, and you just and that's an important point. But I think that the leniency here is even more wide-ranging, which is most of the processed foods. Okay, obviously, unfortunately, you can't have the hummus, right? And you can't have the trina. But there are a lot of the processed foods, it's oil that we're worried about, okay? So I'm just going to read it here. We're not stricter with kitniyot than we are with the 5 cereal grains. Whatever is acceptable regarding these grains is kosher for kitniyot too. Thus, kitniyot that have not come in contact with water, or that have come in contact with water but are not left for more than 18 minutes before being cooked, may be eaten. Okay? When is that a situation? Not really sure. Some poskim are stringent in this respect, but most are lenient. The poskim disagree about oils and whiskeys made from kitniyot. Those who rule leniently contend that the kitniyot prohibition does not apply to oil extracted from them, while those who rule stringently maintain that kitniyot oil has the same status as kitniyot themselves. There's a middle position that asserts that if kitniyot had been rinsed in water, for example, as part of the malting process, they become forbidden and the oil from them is prohibited. However, if they are ground and made into oil without having moistened, they do not have the status of kitniyot.
think the paragraph you read before links to that.
Hmm.
In that, like the way that you make oil and the way that you make whiskey doesn't involve water.
Right.
So it's because you're making
Whiskey doesn't involve oil.
No, I don't know enough, but I feel like that's the link that he's
Whiskey,
making.
it does involve water.
Isn't that the link that he's
It
making?
makes it sound like.
I think, well, I mean, whiskey, they make it with water, but it's like mash. They can make a mash out of it with.
No, but I think you don't rinse the.
The bean.
Yeah, they've already been.
It's already been whatever enough so that it's no longer the grain.
Uh-huh.
I think.
Okay. All right.
That's the link that I'm saying.
This issue of oil is a big one. I'll say that, like my father is strict with oil, so we are strict with oil. However, there are many people, if you do not have a custom upon which to rely or some sort of tradition of how to do it, there certainly is room for leniency. He mentions here as well soybean, cottonseed, and canola, which is a much better name for an oil than what it replaced, which is the rapeseed oil. They are not included in this prohibition. Okay, he does say that some people are stringent with soybean and canola oils, but whoever wishes to be lenient may be so. Most processed foods in Israel have soybean oil, right, or some sort, or canola oil. That's what a lot of them are, or cottonseed oil. Or palm oil, but palm oil is not problematic. So that's really, it's the soybean that is in a lot of them, and Rav Melamed is lenient. And so there are, again, some people are strict. We don't do that, but we haven't been in Israel for a long time, so maybe we go to Israel. That's a different story. But here we don't have oils made of Kitniyot, but if you are without your own traditionist on these matters, then they're yesh al mili smoch, as they say. There is upon whom to rely. Rav Melamed, Rav Yoni Rosenzweig, for those who that's meaningful for. They say that that's okay, that Kitniyot oils are permitted as they are. A lot of issues, things like chocolate and candy, as he mentions here, it says kosher Pesach only for those who eat Kitniyot, are technically permissible even for those who do not eat Kitniyot, because the Kitniyot in these products are added before Pesach and Batel Baro. That's an important point that we'll come back to a little bit later, that when all of the stuff, so when you're talking about making food on Pesach itself, you can't add in Kitniyot and then say, oh, I've got now, like more of whatever, I don't know, like more meat, I don't know, I'm trying to think of, I've got more permissible food against the Kitniyot, and therefore it's nullified. It doesn't work like that, because you can't be mevatel lechatchila. I mean, you can't actively mevatel, nullify something, and that's like goes with also with meat and milk. You've got this huge vat of meat. You can't say, "Oh, I'm just going to drop a little bit of milk in. It's fine," even if there's more than 60 times against that little drop. Since you're doing it consciously, it's not nullified. You can have a million times against it; it doesn't work. So that's if you're making it on Pesach. However, if the food has been made beforehand, then it's been nullified. Right?
Because beforehand there is no prohibition.
Correct. There's no prohibition. And that is will also come up as we talk later on about milk and meat in terms of their kashrut certification. For Pesach, the fact that something happened before Pesach, it becomes nullified.
It's still only b'diavad. Like, you can't intentionally structure that these things occur this way.
He says you can.
Buy the chocolate that is already made that way. Because to me, it's b'diavad.
I don't.
Because I don't think that you can. I don't think you can.
You yourself can't make that chocolate.
Yeah, I don't think you can make your hummus basar before Pesach and then eat it on.
No, also the difference there is that the hummus, because you're using that example, that you can physically see. You see the chickpeas, you see it. The chocolate, you've got whatever, it's the soy lecithin. I never know how to pronounce that. That's kind of mixed in and merged in. You don't see it, and it's a small percentage of it. It's oil, but it's significant. And he says it's fine, even if it's
Do you think you can make a dish that works with this? I think it's b'diavad.
Maybe it is. I'm not sure, but I think you can buy that chocolate.
Yeah, you can buy the
You
chocolate.
can buy the chocolate for sure. I wouldn't make a dish at home. I'd also wouldn't keep, but
No, but that's somebody, for example, using the oil, using soybean oil.
But that's
You can make it
if you believe that soybean oil is permitted, then you don't have that issue at all. If you believe that it's prohibited, then right, you probably shouldn't yourself make it, but you can go ahead and buy that chocolate, I think. Ian, you have a question?
So good. So I mean, they seem to like.
Hold on, guys. I just want to hear what he's saying. Yeah,
there's
sorry.
so there are always a million views, but I mean, like, I've got cousins in Israel who say it's very hard living there, and they have to go to special supermarkets where they buy stuff that hasn't got Kitniyot because it's hard for them to understand the packaging. But then there's other people who say, "Oh no, in Israel, everyone now eats Kitniyot." Like, and they've put like a blanket thing on it. Everyone eats Kitniyot, and no one really worries about it, etc., etc. You know. And
I mean, sorry.
Yeah, so I mean, is there a middle ground or what?
Well, I think the middle ground would be. I would be hesitant to tell an Ashkenazi, even though a lot of this it's quite in vogue these days. People
That's
just
yes.
Going and like, we're done with Kitniyot. Kitniyot's stupid. We're done with it. I don't think that that's the right approach to take. I think if someone's going to Israel, if someone lives in Israel, it's a different story. But if someone's going to Israel for, and they normally, here we don't deal with this that much, to be honest. But if a person's going to Israel and they want to have products and ice cream's another big one, right? They want to have ice cream, want to go to the restaurants and that sort of stuff, then there is room to be lenient with things like oil. But to tell a person, oh, we're just going to give it up, even though, again, it is quite in vogue and, a lot of people are doing it these days, I would be hesitant to tell people to do that. If a person, again, like I said, I have a strong family custom. My father is strict on these matters, and so that's what we do. Why do we do it? Because that's what we do, and there's a value to that. I think that is an not an insignificant point, that we do things because that's what our families do. We have traditions. If there is a family like Ian, you mentioned your family in Israel, and they're struggling, they have to go to here and to there, they should ask the local rabbi. It's worth a conversation. It is worth a conversation. Does that answer your question somewhat, Ian?
Thanks. Yep.
Okay. Maybe here's a good point to pause on this and raise another, because the footnotes here are good. I mean, I there's a lot of reading here. Please, you got to take these home, and I'll send these out to those of you who are either listening later or watching on Zoom at the moment. Because the footnotes here are pretty interesting. It talks about peanut oil and sesame oil and that sort of stuff. If you are interested in reading about it, obviously the Badatz is strict about these things, but Reb Melamed yesh al mi lismoch, as I mentioned before. What I want to mention, and this is something that is really, really important, and I'm going to stop sharing this, and you guys aren't going to have this in front of you, unfortunately, but I think many of you will be familiar with this already. What if somebody has an eating disorder, and the only foods that they can't eat or the diets they can eat include Kitniyot foods?
Celiac.
Or like somebody who's like celiac, who has nothing, they don't have, they have no issues because no matzah, right? It's like, not a problem. No chametz. They can't have chametz, right? They can't have matzah. They can't have matzah pizza. That's a terrible thing. So, right. So there's celiac, which is like, obviously,
Or vegan.
Right. Or, they eat vegetables anyway, like all year round. So, no, it is an issue. I think vegan is...
Sources.
Sorry? Vegan's
Protein
more...
sources for vegans are challenging. Protein sources for vegans at Pesach is challenging.
Yeah, right. There's no tofu, right.
Yeah.
And lentils and that sort of stuff. Yeah. So now vegan is a choice, and it's a choice I respect. But what about someone, and that is an issue. And I understand. Sorry, Ian?
No, nothing.
But what about someone who doesn't have a choice in the matter? Either they're celiac or they have some sort of eating disorder. I want to bring to your attention first, before we kind of talk about some of these things, a really important resource that Rabavi and I were speaking about earlier today. And that is... It's called Mental Health and Pesach. That was put out by Rav Yoni Rosenzweig, who I mentioned earlier. And in this little, I'll send out a link to download it if you're interested. I mean, hopefully people don't have to deal with this in a practical sense, but I think just to be able to look through to see the sensitivity and the approach that they're taking, I think is a really important thing. For those of you who are not familiar, Ravioni Rosenzweig, who was the Rosh Kollel here in Mizrahi many years ago, he is now part of this organization called Ma'agale Nefesh that looks after, so it says, the Center for Mental Health, Community, and Halacha. And so they deal with all these issues and questions of mental health in its intersection with halacha and with Jewish thought and Jewish values. And he deals with these very questions. I'll just look at some of them with you here, and I apologize to those of you guys here that don't have that in front of you. But just in terms of like the questions of Kitniyot, for example, let's just find it. So, like he talks about, for example, eating chametz on Pesach. Can you give someone chametz? So he says it is forbidden to cause a person who's mentally unwell, even if deemed incompetent halachically, to transgress any prohibition. As such, it is not permitted to feed such a person chametz on Pesach unless this is being done in order to save the person's life, or the individual is considered by halacha not to be mentally competent, and this may restore mental capacity. Okay, but what if a person's dealing, Rahman al-Islam, with an eating disorder, and for them they've got a very specific, very precise diet that they have to follow in order to ensure that they continue to progress? So first off, it requires medical insight to deal with a competent medical, and someone who also can understand the halacha. So it's complicated. Rabbi Bart would be one. But he says here that it is certainly appropriate to be flexible with regard to Kitniyot for those whose custom is to avoid Kitniyot. This should be done as required according to the following gradations of leniency. And then he goes through the gradations as we kind of spoke about already. So, that's an interesting sort of new frontier. It's not a new frontier of halacha, but the way it's been being dealt with in these sorts of, questions. So if you have a person who, Rahman al-Islam, has an eating disorder, yes, it would be permitted to consume Kitniyot products as well. He mentions here someone who's under the age of bar bat mitzvah who struggles with autism, and sometimes they have issues with eating certain foods, and there's only certain foods that they will eat. So he says that it will be permitted to feed them Kitniyot for those people who refrain from eating Kitniyot. Older children, possibly. He mentions here that it should be prepared ahead of time to discuss, what you do and to kind of gear them up. But at the end of the day, if you're going to deal with a situation where, it's not, there's no other options, so there's room to be lenient. So I wanted to bring that to people's attention because, again, it's another interesting area of halacha, and where we see that Kitniyot is an important minhag, but in certain circumstances there's room for leniency. Questions, answers? How y'all going at home there? Can I get a thumbs up from you guys? Thanks, Naomi. All right. Thanks, Zoom user. Appreciate it. Cool. So anybody have any questions on that? No. Let's keep rolling. Another area that is really important, okay? So I think hopefully we have dealt in a somewhat thorough manner. I don't know if we call it what we just did thorough, but hopefully we can, we dealt with the issue of Kitniyot. You all comfortable in terms of go to Israel? What's going to happen? Yeah, all good, more or less. You'll make it up when you get there. Cool. What about milk from an animal that ate chametz? So the issue there is that, as chametz, if an animal eats chametz, you're getting benefit from that chametz, and it's taking that food source and turning it into now something that you're going to consume. So that's problematic. That would be problematic. How do we deal with this?
Am I getting benefit from the animal ate?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
animal's getting benefit from what it ate.
Yes, but
It
then
can't produce milk unless it has sufficient energy, and it gets the energy from what it ate.
right. So he says the cow is able to produce milk by the virtue of the chametz, and since it is forbidden to derive benefit from chametz, perhaps it is forbidden to benefit from the milk produced by the virtue of chametz. It goes without saying that well, we'll say it anyway. Cows should not be eating chametz, right? Cows should not be eating chametz, but they do.
Meaning,
Cows should be eating grass, right? Cows should be eating grass. What, your cows eat chametz on Pesach? Cows should not be eating chametz. They should be eating grass. And many of the issues that we find in the modern agricultural system are due to the fact that they feed cows chametz and corn. But a lot of grain. Why do they feed them grain? To fatten them up quickly. And it's a lot cheaper than having, you need a lot of grassland. But we live in a world where they feed cows chametz and kitniyot. There's no issue for cows eating kitniyot, just like your dog can eat kitniyot. But the issue is that a lot of cows, and certainly in Israel, they're feeding them cheap grain in order to fatten them up quickly. And yes, it's more cost effective. So what do? Just like we saw before with the issue of, kitniyot oils that are mixed into chocolate. It's not a problem if it's made before Pesach. So too, any milk that is purchased before Pesach is fine. Because even if it did consume chametz, it was already batel, it was already nullified. It was permitted for you to get benefit from that chametz when the cow was eating the chametz. And so now, once you've nullified, so any potential existence of chametz or any potential benefit from chametz has already been nullified when you nullify the chametz and whatever, Erev Pesach. Okay, so that's why people load up on milk and you buy a whole bunch of milk beforehand. You put it in the refrigerator, in the freezer, because that's the ideal way to approach it. Then you don't have any concern. But what about inevitably, just like you always run out of eggs, you always run out of milk, right? That's how it works, especially if you've got teenage children, right? What about if you ran out of milk? Can you now purchase more milk on Pesach? So what do you do? What do you think?
does that fall into like a b'diavad?
It is b'diavad, right? When we say b'diavad, meaning here it is, here's the situation. It's after the fact. It's already happened. There's nothing you can do.
He says it's fine, especially if it's a Gorisha.
So there's no issue. Certainly here in Australia, there's no issue with buying buying milk on Pesach itself, on Chol. Yeah, don't buy it on Yantif, but on Chol Hamoed you can buy it because, again, I might be wrong here, but there's a good likelihood that wherever you're buying the milk from is not owned by a Jew, and even if it is, it's probably a conglomerate or whatever it is. Certainly, if it's all those Nestle or Peters, whoever that sort of who owns the, I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But even if you're buying, your local organic milk, it's likely that it's not a Jew. The issue is more in Israel. The fact that still a lot of dairy farms to this day are they're not keeping halacha in Israel, but certainly you can find in Israel, you can find ones that will say kosher Pesach. That is for sure that they're buying from a non-Jew on Pesach, or it was it was produced before Pesach as well. The issue is even if you have to have bought it before, right? So it's yours to nullify. So there are ways around it, but the general approach, he says, is you can rely on several leniencies to buy milk on Pesach, even in Israel. Certainly here, there's no issue with that. Okay, is it ideal to load your your freezer beforehand? Yes, so long as you're not taking from everybody else. It's like there's one day where you can buy Tempo yogurt at the kosher stores. It's like for 45 minutes, and if you miss it, you're done. There's like no yogurt. It's like insane here. Israel, it's a bit of a better situation. But if so yes.
It's like when the camp runs out of stuff and they go to the supermarket, the local supermarket in Portsea, and just empty the entire supermarket.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's not ideal. Let me bring Rav Melamed just for those of you who are concerned. You go into Israel during Pesach Tnuva, a major Israeli dairy producer only accepts milk from dairy farms that have been made kosher for Pesach and whose cows are not fed chametz. In this case, it is unnecessary to be scrupulous and to buy milk products before Pesach, because even dairy products manufactured on Pesach are completely kosher for the duration of the holiday. Okay? A similar question exists around meat, about meat products. If it was same thing, if the animal was was shechted before Pesach, no problem, right? So even if there are, there's grains or something like that were fed to the animal, or they're still in the, it's in the, I guess if you come across the stomach of the animal, normally you don't, right? Normally you're not going to come across the stomach. But if you buy it beforehand, that's okay. If it's a non-Jewish animal, he said, and fed chametz and slaughtered in Pesach, he says some poskim forbid consuming its meat, while others are lenient. So he says it is proper to be stringent and not buy the meat of a Jew's animal that was fed chametz on Pesach. But generally speaking, certainly here and even in Israel, you're going to be buying. It's going to say on it kosher Pesach. It will have been created beforehand. Either they will have fed the animals kitniyot and not chametz, or it was shechted beforehand, and so it's unlikely that you're going to come across meat, proper packaged meat.
Butchers are closed on Pesach.
And butchers are right. So here, there's no issue whatsoever. I mean, you can buy it, but if you're buying it at the supermarket, it's going to say kosher Pesach, right? Here, it's no issue. The issue is more in Israel, but there's also room to get around. The same applies to eggs. He says, what could be the issue with eggs, right? So again, also, it's like depends what you're feeding it. That the hens were fed chametz. He says it's not a problem because wasn't prohibited when you actually eat them. There was an issue that was raised in terms of the numbers that were the ink that was kind of printed onto eggs, which is not a thing that's done here, but in Israel it is, and there was a concern that they were using some sort of alcohol that had within it, there was chametz within it. It's not done anymore. That was a concern. So too, so you don't have to. Certainly here in Australia, you don't need to buy all those eggs beforehand. Can you? Yes, but you don't have to. And he says in Israel, if it's owned by a Jew, it's better to be strict, but there's room to be lenient as well. I will put in here that I do every year whenever we go through these laws, my little public service announcement, that you don't need to go to your local kosher shop and buy the battery eggs because you can ensure that they're kosher Pesach. Right? That's a thing. You go, they say kosher Pesach, battery eggs. I don't think that Jews should be purchasing battery eggs in general. When I mean a battery egg, we're talking about a chicken that is kept, the hens kept in a very, very small area, like a teeny area, about the size of half a paper, half a page. So is that A5? Yes. So it's kept in a space for the entirety of its life, in a space this big, and it cannot move and it cannot go anywhere. And I would believe that would fall under the category of tsar ba'alei chaim, and so a person should not be purchasing those eggs, even if you can ensure that they are kosher. Right, that these are kosher eggs, right? I don't think that those are kosher eggs. Why? What's the issue with why do they prefer battery eggs over free range? Sorry. Oh, well, let's say general year round, not just on Pesach.
Blood spots.
So blood spots. The issue there was the blood spots because for a free range chicken, which generally it's around here, it's not an issue anyway. With free range, there's a possibility that there's a male hanging around, and so that if you find a blood spot, it could be a fertilized egg, and then that's problematic. If it's a battery egg, and even if there's a blood spot, it's fine because there's no possibility that it was fertilized. So that is a concern, right? Obviously, we're from Jews, right? We have to ensure that we're not eating blood spots. To be honest, I don't know about you guys. I've been in Australia for like 11 years. I can count on one hand the amount of blood spots that I've found. Not even. There's a lot of things that look like them, but they're not. Right? A lot of protein spots.
I heard a issue here that said that they're not blood spots.
It's protein. It's a little protein.
There's like a checking process.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is.
On like under a light, they hold it up to us.
There's some process which means that it was some kind of color. They said it's not. It's actually there.
Interesting. Okay, good to know. Yeah. I would say even with that, even if and again, I know eggs are expensive as they are, right? And free range and organic is crazy expensive, but like for me, it's worth it, because I think that it's problematic for us to buy battery eggs. Okay, let's keep rolling here. So also medicines on Pesach, it just comes down to the question of taste. If you're swallowing a pill and even if it has some sort of starch in it, definitely if it's made out of kitniyot, there's no problem. Sometimes some starch there, it's wheat starch, right? And that's where it would be problematic. With that being said, if it's not really there for taste, you're not tasting it, you're just swallowing it. Definitely, if we're talking about something that's life-threatening and you need to be taking this in order to look at it, doesn't matter if it's got chametz in it, you must take it. You must continue to take it. But if we're talking about something that's not, I don't know, like a multivitamin, it's best to refrain unless you know for sure that it's, like some sort of potato starch and not a wheat starch. The big question, I think, really comes around medicines that you actually taste, so like Nurofen or something like that. In that situation, since there is a taste there and, like they do something, they're adding something in order to ensure that it tastes somewhat palatable, then yes, it needs to be on the kosher list, because there could be some additive, some chametz additive that is done specifically to improve the taste of that thing, and that's what we have to be concerned for. But if we're not talking about something that really tastes, less problematic. Yeah.
And Ravgani in that
Yeah.
says that like any psychiatric medication is a no question asked fine.
Correct. So for those of you who couldn't hear that, Sir Avi mentioned that in that little PDF that I shared with you earlier that Ravioni put out in terms of mental health and halacha. So if we're talking about psychiatric medicine, even if there's chametz in it, a person must continue to take it under doctor's orders. Let's pause there. I think that's kind of, I'm sure there's lots more to go over, but I'd love to just see if there's anybody has any questions about that or about questions about Pesach in general. Some of you might not have had the opportunity to tune in last week in terms of cleaning or preparing. Does anybody have any questions that they are curious about or want me to go over? If I can, this is a good opportunity. Sweet. So we're all ready. Awesome. Okay, that's really what I wanted to cover for this evening. Hopefully it was review for many of us, but it's a good opportunity again to start thinking about these things and organizing things, and hopefully all of us will be in Israel this year. And we'll be able to, enjoy the benefits of being in Israel for Pesach. But for those of us who never have to be here, we'll make the most of it, I'm sure, and it'll be an incredible time as well. Keep an eye out for the next 2 weeks. We'll be having more kind of philosophical, thoughtful approaches to Pesach and shift gears from talking about halacha. Not that we've covered everything in great detail. A lot more to learn, but we'll kind of shift gears to also begin to prepare ourselves spiritually as well. Okay, we'll call it there for now. Have an amazing evening, everyone.
Thank you.
See you guys.